My name is Elana, and I use they, them pronouns.
And my name is Jessie. I use she, her pronouns.
And we're making menches.
Making Menches is your home for queer, anti-Zionist Jewish ritual, radical education, and community.
Today, we're here with our dear friend, Jules Pashall. Jules uses the handle fat as the C, and we're with Jules today just to talk about the amazing work that they do and sort of explore their spiritual and anti-Zionist journey and identity is. So, hi, Jules. Welcome.
Hi. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here with you both.
Tell us a little bit about your work and what brought you to it. Big question. So we're just going to jump in.
Great. So my work is many things. I work under the handle, as you said, fat as the C. So I work with individuals, I work with groups, mostly to access fat as an ally to our collective liberation of like, how could fat tissue and our relationship with fat tissue be a place for transformation and a place for exploration about building the world that I think many of us are dreaming up, making in real time, especially in this moment of so many systems around us are crumbling, and we're sort of in this huge moment of transformation and transition. It sort of feels like we need everything we've got, and fat tissue is something we have. We all have it, and it's such a huge part of our bodies, our energy sources that we use in this planet, like oil. It's such a big part of so many ancient and current spiritual and traditional indigenous practices. It's, how we cook. It's something we eat. It's something we lather our bodies in. It's right. It's this thing that we all interact with all the time and is part of our bodies, and also for many of us is a place where so much of colonization and empire and the systems of oppression that are begat from those things. Fat tissue is for many of us a place where those systems get acted out and enacted and can come to live, and kind of can enter our bodies. Like, it's like, yeah, our fat tissue sometimes is where all that gets projected onto in terms of how people are racialized, how anti-Blackness operates, how white supremacy operates, how gender policing, gender binarism, and the way those are related. The way fat is on the body, how much fat is on the body, is a way in which those systems get policed and monitored and enacted, and they continue. We have been, coerced into not feeling to survive colonialism and capitalism and the horrors of like what we live in. So we have really good reasons to not feel. We don't value feeling. And there's like, we've lost a lot of our inherited ancestral ways of feeling together that helped us feel and metabolize together. And because we don't have a lot of those systems, we're often forced into situations where we're being asked to feel alone. And that is unbearable, because so much of what we're being asked to felt right now can't be felt alone and shouldn't. And so I think what fat can do and what feeling fat can do is it can make more space literally in your own body to like have more body to feel stuff with and be present with. I think oftentimes through my work, when I invite people into their fat, a lot of times people are so much more aware of the fluidity of their body. They're so much more aware of like stories come to them that they forgot, like pieces of their own lineage, their own ancestry, like family always comes up of like stories about food and family bodies, and beautiful stories about like the feeling of like your soft grandmother and how her fat felt. Like that's something that comes up quite often. Like there's these things that I think, so it makes more space to feel, like in a very literal sense. I think it reminds us of the softness and fluidity of our bodies. I always like to remind people that like fat is literally everywhere. It's all over. And I always am like, your bones have fat in the middle, like your marrow is fat, and that's where your blood comes from. Like your fat is, it's so a part of, it's so a part of our aliveness. So I think it helps people feel their aliveness. I've like taught, I did a workshop for dancers, and this dancer was like, oh my gosh, people have always asked me to like move fluidly, like, but like it wasn't until you asked me to feel my fat, all of a sudden it was like, oh yeah, those are my like I can move with fluidity. Like, so there's just in this very material way a lot that we're cut off from accessing, that is available to us. And a lot of times people also feel grief they haven't let themselves feel. There's like a lot of times there's like shame that hasn't like had the space to be felt. And that's, we want that too. Like that needs to be surfaced. Like that needs to be metabolized. The sun needs to shine on that. It like shouldn't be kept like in the like shadowy parts. It should like get like shame gets to come out. Grief needs to be brought out. And so in those ways, like so those are like sort of individual ways, but that feeds the collective, right? Like it feeds the collective. And it also, I think for many people, it like reconceptualizes like what a body is. It's like, whoa, like, oh my gosh, like my body has way more going on than I thought. And like I want everyone to feel like they got more body. Like I'm just like, we coming back to like where we are, you know, Grace Lee Boggs, like what time is it on the clock of the world? Like we need all hands on, all cells. I need all your cells, like all your fat cells. Like I need all of my cells to do the work that's being asked of me in this time. I don't know. I don't have like stuff to spare. I just don't. Like I don't have, there's too much to feel. There's too much to do where I could be like, I'm just not going to use that part of me. Like, no. And what gets lost when we don't use that part of us? I mean, that is like a huge question of my work, is what is lost when we ignore fat? What is lost when we forget about it? What is lost when we push it to the side? That there is so much to be integrated into the whole when we bring fat into the conversation and into our consciousness. And again, a big part of that too is what lies there also is lots of stories about power, lots of stories about oppression, lots of stories about the way empire and colonization has moved through generationally and like transmitted through people. So many stories I hear of when I bring in fat, there's always a story about, oh my gosh, like, and from many different places, about like a parent's story about their fat and their body and the shame, the violence, and how that's been passed down. And depending on many things, like your experience of coming from people who have been colonized, being colonizers, many of us come from a combination of both of those things, depending on different times. That contextualizes it, and it gives us information about how fat has been weaponized and enlisted to colonize bodies, like colonize groups of people, and is a way that happens. So my work is coming from a background as a theater artist, spiritual practitioner. I trained as a somatic therapist. bringing together like creative, spiritual, and embodiment practice to approach our fat with, I like to say, curiosity and love. Like we're bringing a sense of curiosity and love. We're not bringing a sense of like, this is only good and like, I just love my body. Like I'm not bringing any kind of sense that there's a forced positivity. I feel like I was raised in many ways by like the fat activist movement. I'm 35, I'm turning 36. I was raised in like the height of the beginning of what they refer to as like the obesity epidemic, the childhood obesity epidemic. I was always a fat kid. So I have a very specific entry point in my own liberation into this work, of sort of really understanding how I could get free. And then I think as I've gotten older and I'm a queer person, I'm a trans person, I'm a disabled person, I'm a Jewish person, I'm a white person, I'm an upper middle class person, I'm a rich, like all these things intersect in my experience of fatness. So my work is my background as like a theater practitioner, a theater artist, having a spiritual practice, a Jewish spiritual practice, training as a somatic therapist, and also my upbringing as a fat activist. And I can talk about that more in another context, but that those things really inform how I come to this work. And I think my work has changed a lot. It was really focused on like fat people and fat community, which is still a huge part of my work. But another piece of my work now is being like, oh, like everyone has fat tissue. So what are we doing with it? And how are we relating to it? And what are our stories about our fat? What are the stories we tell about other people's fat, our own fat? What stories have we learned from our families? What stories have we learned from our culture? What are the stories we want to like lift up and continue? Because some of those stories are beautiful. And then what are the stories that are tied to the violence and oppression of hierarchy and empire and colonization and white supremacy, like all those things that we named. And how can fat be a place where, if we come with curiosity and love, what could we learn? What could happen? Like, what's the possibility there? So I think, yeah, my little offering is that, oh, what if we just like tried something else? Like, what if we were just curious, and what if we saw what was here, and what if we said we don't want to continue that story? Like, what if we were like, I want to disrupt that. I want to disrupt lineages of empire and colonization and violence and hierarchy. And what if I asked my fat for help in doing that? Yeah.
Wow, that was incredible. And there's so many directions I want to take that in. But for full context for everyone listening, we've met Jules in a Jewish context. And so I'm going to, hone in on that a little bit, because I also want to bring in and direct people to read this incredible chapter that you wrote in Diverse Bodies, Diverse Practices. And the chapter is called Thank God I'm Fat, Gifts from the Underbelly. And it's on your link tree. So now I'm just really promoting everything on your Instagram. But I wanted to bring it in because you kind of talk about this connection to specifically your ancestry and Jewish ancestry and Ashkenazi ancestry. And so this question, I think, can bring us from your incredible intro into a new realm, which is, how is your work informed by Judaism?
Well, I think in some ways, like everything I do is informed by just being a Jewish person, by being a Jew. I mean, what I talk about in that chapter is the ways in which I also have like a mixed heritage, right? So my mother's family is not Jewish. They're like white Puritan colonizers who came in the 1600s, were really part of creating the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So holding the Jewish part, it's like I have to hold that part too, and how this is connected to my work. My exploration of my Jewish ancestry, which is less accessible to me, unsurprisingly, because of diaspora, because of anti-Semitism, because of Shoah, World War II, like all of these things. And my non-Jewish lineage, I can trace back like almost like thousands of years because it's like so preserved. So that's all to say that when I was in my early 20s, I went with my mom to meet with one of my family members who I hadn't like from one of my Jewish sides, my dad's family. And I saw all these pictures of ancestors I had never seen before. And my great grandmother, Lizzie Ryan, I like saw a picture of her and she looked just like me and she was fat. And I didn't have any family members who were fat like me. Like I didn't grow up with that. And so just that, like that sort of understanding of like, oh yeah, like that's what some bodies look like. And my body is not actually like far away from all these other bodies. But because most of the family I interacted with, not to say that there aren't like fat Anglo-Saxon Protestants walking around, but that my relationship to my extended family was really limited to that part of my extended family. And people just didn't look like me. I didn't feel like I looked like anybody. And so when I saw that, it was really powerful and really understood that I like my body comes from a place and my body comes from a people. And yeah, so I mean, that in a very literal way of like seeing this Jewish ancestor and seeing so much of myself in her was can't be understated, like how that just materiality of seeing her was so impactful. And then in terms of like the values I feel like I was raised in a Reconstructionist synagogue. My rabbi growing up was Rabbi Tu Bshvat, who's a lesbian Reconstructionist rabbi who was arrested at the border of Gaza recently, like with a contingent of rabbis, like going to bring food. So I was raised in a Jewish community where Judaism was not about, really wasn't even about God. Judaism was about like tikkun olam. Judaism was about like repair the world. Like we're here to repair the world. Like the theme for my B'nai Mitzvah, I have a twin brother. We had a B'nai Mitzvah. Like our theme was like community service. Like that was the theme of the B'nai Mitzvah. And I feel grateful. My mom's father, who was a Jewish communist, like he was not a religious person in any way, but I would say that in many ways, he really gave me so many of my values that were very aligned with that of just like you are here to do whatever you can to serve the collective. Like you are here to use whatever resources, whatever gifts you have to offer them for the sake of like all of us. And that was like a very like Jewish communist orientation that was never about Israel, was never about empire, was never about our safety, was always about like how could more people be safe? How could more of us be safe? What do we do now? Like now that we have more than we did before, what do we do now? How do we expand? Who else is that we talk about? I feel like my grandfather really gave me a sense of like extending the we of who that is. And I think my grandmother too, who is a non-Jewish person who's like from that Anglo-Saxon side, I think had deep awareness and great grief and anger towards a lot of the ways in which like systems were operating for her benefit. And so it's not only like my Jewishness, like, but my Jewishness is like entwined with social justice, with collective liberation from like a really young age. And also that Judaism is like not isolated, that like Jewishness is not separate. I think because of that intercultural, interreligious, really non-religious marriage between my grandparents, their like religion was communism. Both of them, they met like in the Communist Party in college when they were young. So
Literally dream meet cute.
Yeah, very cute.
Thank you for that. I feel like you started to touch on this, so I want to bring us here. How do you feel like anti-Zionism shows up in your work, if at all?
Yeah. To me, what anti-Zionism is one part of a path to like the fall of all empires. Yeah, decolonizing so many places, and freedom for all people and all beings. And so that's, I mean, I think I call myself an anti-Zionist because I call myself lots of things because I want to flag to people, but I'm not like, I'm not attached, not to be like that guy. I was like, I'm not attached to labels, but I'm not really attached to labels because I'm really here to be like, I I just want you to know I think all beings should be free. And that's what I'm here to do. And that's the side I'm on. I'm on the side of like all beings getting free. And as much freedom as is possible. And I'm on the side of like planet Earth. I'm on the side of the animals. I'm on the side of like all living beings. I'm on the side of the bodies of water. I'm on the side of the trees. I'm on that side if there are sides. I'm on the side of like healing our relationship with this planet collectively and each other. And to me, anti-Zionism is part of that. And so when I think about my work, yeah, it's just like it has to be. It's like there's no like Zionism has absolutely no place in all of us getting free.
That is so true and so beautiful. This question is also biased by me having this transformative experience in your workshop. So it's a very obvious question for me, but I want you to just share your genius here. How can reconceptualizing fat in Judaism help everyone deepen our connections to Judaism?
Judaism loves fat. Judaism loves fat. Judaism loves fat. I Jewishness loves oil. Jewishness like ritualistically contains like so like Hannukah, like every time we light a candle, like there's just so much in like the juiciness of life that I think is part of Jewishness. And when I think about like halev, like though like that like holy flesh that we're like the fat that you're like not supposed to eat because it's like in kashrut, like it's too close to the organs, it like can't be discerned or something from like blood because it's like protecting the organs, and it's like the thing that you're supposed to give to God, like it's like the actual thing that is like the most holy part and it's supposed to go to God. So like I just think Judaism loves fat, and I think most indigenous, and I placing Jewishness next to indigeneity is very complicated, and I want to do that with like a lot of care of like Jews are not indigenous to the Levant in the way that people talk about it. I want to be very clear when I say this. But as an ancient practice that is thousands of years old, that had at one point connections to different places, and other people who, I would say all peoples in my research, all peoples I've come across, if you go far back enough, their people did ritual with fat. Their people did ritual with oil. Their people did ritual with animal fat. They're like that is part of the understanding that there's just like something really alive about this tissue. Like it's energetically so dense. We literally use it for fuel. Like it's just really rich, and it has a lot of energy and it has a lot of life force in it. And I think ancient Jews knew that and used it as a part of their ritual in a way that acknowledges that. And so just to say that, like Judaism in my worldview, like really loves fat and understands fat as a like schmaltz. Like I just like it's just it's the good stuff. And the way I relate to Judaism as a land-based, seasonal, cyclical practice, that Judaism is like tied to seasons, it's tied to seasons of the earth. It's I'm making like a circle with my finger. it's very round. It has like this round circularness of time. And I think part of my relationship to this work that has changed is to understand everything as part of a system and part of a cycle. And so I'm never going to be like, fat is only good. And like nothing is only good. Nothing is like nothing on the earth, and nothing should have to be. Like, we are complex. Everything is complex. Everything has risk. Everything has shadow. Everything has like everything alive gets to be complex and nuanced and shouldn't have to be forced into a binary of good or bad, because like that's Christian hegemony. So Judaism, in its not becoming a religion of empire and associated with Christianity and aligned with Christianity, the way Christianity and Christian Zionism has co-opted Judaism and tried to pull it in to become a religion of empire. When we don't do that, and Judaism is a religion that is tied to the land, tied to cycles of time, tied to seasons, we see the ways in which fat is celebrated in times when people need it. Like, you use it in winter. Like, there are these times where like we fry things with fat. We worship fat in times when we really need it. And it's not that we forget about it other times of year, but it has different times when we need it in different ways, like everything. And I think this is like definitely a tangent, but what happens coming from like a fat activist, and any response to like hegemonic violence of like this, again, binary of like good and bad and hierarchy, that often what happens is like, I would say this in all of my marginalized identities, the communities around those, is that, and I've heard this from other people too, right, that we don't always get to have nuance and complexity publicly, because we just have to show up and be like, this is only good. This is, you're saying this is bad. You say fat is bad. I have to say fat is good. And I definitely think fat is also good, but I'm like not interested in anything having to be forced into that binary. And I think that is a huge part of my work. And so coming like Judaism, I think, has space for that. Judaism has space for both. And Judaism in its like best, most, for me, like liberation oriented Judaism is like, yeah, we have polarizing forces, not because they're in opposition, but because they need each other. That's definitely like a Rabbi Jill Hammer teaching. To me, there's space within Judaism to celebrate it and to also not have to place it as only good. And that I find really like freeing.
Are there any spiritual practices that you use to bolster yourself in this work, this heavy, difficult work?
Heavy, yeah. Inviting myself to try to go slower. I can go really fast. Being in water. I mean, I call my work Fat as the Sea for a lot of reasons, but one of them being that my spiritual belief is that everything is everything. Everything is connected. Everything touches. And so to understand myself and everything of me as of the earth, and like everything of me of divinity, spirit, whatever, dare I say, God, that everything of me is included in that, and that's true for all of us, even when that's hard for me, even when I don't like someone, or even when I'm like really angry, or think that person's really violent or unsafe. There's like something, I have to like let myself see myself in even the things that are hardest to look at. I float in water a lot. I think part of how I understand like the gift of being in a very fat body is like how easily my body floats. I can just like be in water and be held in a way that is it's like such a gift. It's like it's so special. Like I can just like vibe in water. I don't even have to move. And sometimes I look at animals and like animals that have such different bodies than mine. And I like imagine what it feels like to be their body. I'm like, oh, what is that like? What is it like to be like a tiny sparrow? Or what is it like to be a horseshoe crab? My friend Eli does a lot of work around horseshoe crabs. Like, what would it be like to have like a soft underbelly and like a hard shell? Or what would it be like to be like a tiny little bird? And I like, there's so much gift in all the ways you could be a body on this. All of it's amazing. Like, it's incredible. And like, my body is also like amazing and incredible. And one of the great things my body gets to do is just like float. So I think, yeah, a lot of my spiritual practice is about like sort of trying to place myself within the rest of it. Like, it's like to sort of just like place myself within the earth, within other creatures, within other people. Um, I sing a lot. I sing a lot, like make up songs. I light a lot of candles. Yeah, I think a lot of them are like sensory and about finding ways that like my body is a access point to spirit, like every body is. And I think it's like the spiritual practice of continuing to remember that my body is just another body, like just another way to be a body. And it has like amazing parts of it, has really struggles to it too. There's like, my body is, I'm sure like everybody's body has like struggle and pain and also like tremendous potential for like euphoric, beautiful sensation and experiences. And I feel like, yeah, I'd like to work less hard. I work pretty hard to notice that, to like notice and to notice like the great suffering too, like to notice, like for instance, I just had really bad food poisoning a couple weeks ago. This is, I won't go too into it because it was gnarly and it was coming out both ends, as they say. And I really had to just like surrender. I was just like, well, I think you have to just like orient to this as some kind of spiritual journey. Like your body is moving something through and you're just gonna do what you can to surrender. Um, and yeah, so like everything gets to be a spiritual experience, even pooping and throwing up at the same time. Like that's a very spiritual experience, very spiritual, very somatic. Um, and I think, yeah, it's like, oh, I float in water. It's like, yeah. And then also like when I'm pooping and throwing up, I'm also trying to like think about God. And I'm trying to think about like, oh, what might what else what can I release while I do all this releasing? That was the question I asked, was like, what else could we release if we really surrender to the process of this? So yeah, spiritual.
No, that is so real though. Like that's making me think of I was talking to someone really wise about psilocybin mushrooms. And like one of the things that can happen when you take mushrooms is some people throw up. And that's like from a lot of like breaking down of the cell wall and how it like doesn't it like our body has a hard time processing it. And like the way that this person was describing it was like that is your body like rejecting and moving through something really powerful. So like thinking about our bodily functions not just as like bodily functions but as like yeah, rejection, release, and yeah, that feels really really tied.
Yeah. I think there's like, yeah, a lot of people who like have indigenous practices tied to different medicines and different plants. Like that's a part of those experiences. And um yeah, they're holy. They're coming out both holes holy. That yeah.
Title
I
of the
love that.
podcast.
Yes. All the holes. No, and I love that. As someone who has bronchitis right now, ugh, but also I get when I get stressed, I often feel a lot of pressure in my chest. And so I've been noticing that my anxiety is higher while I have bronchitis. And I don't know if it's a feedback loop where like my body's like, okay, I'm feeling tightness in the chest. We must be anxious. And it's like, no, I'm actually just sick. But my body like doesn't always know the difference, I think, because of like when we carry stuff and
Yeah.
releasing that is just so important. Wow, beautiful. I have a question that now feels like a totally different direction. But before we were talking about pooping and throwing up everywhere, you were so deep in this kind of like honoring of all forms of life and that like we can understand ourselves better by kind of putting ourselves in different bodies, right? And thinking what those bodies would feel like and how they'd move through the world. And um curious to hear about your decision to open your work up to folks with all different bodies.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much to say here. First I want to say like affinity space is totally sacred. And we all need spaces where we can go where we feel like just an easier time in terms of belonging and not having to explain ourselves and feeling understood, feeling known. And I have never been in an affinity space where that means we aren't still navigating what we navigate outside of affinity spaces, meaning we're still navigating power, we're still navigating other identities, we're still navigating hierarchies, we're still navigating all the ways we've been indoctrinated and coerced into like so much empire, whatever, Christian hegemony, white supremacy, all these things, like they're operating. That's not to say we shouldn't have them at all. It's just to say that it doesn't end us having to have like ongoing conversations about any of those things. And I don't think people think it does, but like, how do we just tolerate difference? Like, how do we be with difference? Audre Lorde has like an amazing essay about this that is really about being with difference. And Bernice Johnson Reagan, who just passed, and like one of her quotes that was going around was, I don't remember exactly, but it was basically like, you're never going to be with people who are just like you. Sort of like, we're just, that's like, I'm not doing all this work so that I only can be around people who share identities with me. I'm doing work so that I can be in relationship across lots of difference. What I do hope there is that there's like some shared values. My work is really for people who want to engage with their fat maybe differently and want to engage with their bodies maybe differently and have an investment in that. And so if there's an, and that's not like an identity based space, it's a value, it's a shared value, it's a shared orientation. I do have affinity based spaces like for fat people because I think especially doing somatic work, body based work is so alienating as a fat person because fat hatred is rampant everywhere. But I think in body based spaces, it's like louder and bigger sometimes. It's like in a body based space, fatness and fat is can be really pathologized, can be really villainized. Yeah, it just shows up in a really big way. So it is important for me to have body centered spaces for fat people because I want fat people, I want all people who want this to have this, which is like access to more of themselves and more of their bodies and more of their feeling and more of their aliveness and more of their experience. And I think for a lot of people who are fat, being in a space for fat people is really important for that. And fat Fat is for everybody. Everybody is impacted by fat hatred and fat phobia. Like, you don't have to be fat to experience fat phobia. I've talked to like many very small people who go to the doctor, like right in a medical context, experience fat phobia. And I'm like, that's not a fat person. How are you, like, why is this happening for you? So fat phobia is something that impacts everybody in a really intense way. And everybody has fat. And I don't want to get so grandiose, but I'm like, I do believe that changing our relationship with our fat is part of changing our relationship with everything, and changing our relationship with our fat and our body and the way we relate to ourselves, and ourselves, and being curious about that, and being open for that to change and move is a part of how we change how we relate to each other. It's how we change how we relate to the earth. Something I like to say is that the reality of my work is that we're like, when we enter a space that I'm facilitating in a mixed space, so a space where there are fat people and non-fat people. Non-fat is a funny word. It's like, you're non-fat, but like not a fat identified person, or someone who lives in a thin body, a smaller body, that what we're gathering under is like a value that all bodies exist the way that they exist and get to exist exactly the way that they exist. And nobody has to be, no one owes anyone health. Nobody owes anyone a certain kind of body. It's sort of like an invitation to like, what if there wasn't a hierarchy of bodies? Like, what if that was not how we related to bodies? How would that change how we relate to ourselves and to each other? And sometimes I'm like, yeah, so if your question, or if what you're coming up against is sort of like, do fat people have the right to exist? I think that can sort of be behind the question behind the question sometimes that people ask me, is like, they're like, well, what about this? But like, the real question is like, well, should that fat person be allowed to exist? Or like, should that really fat person be allowed to be that fat, is sometimes like the question behind what people are asking. Or like, well, like, that fat person has a chronic illness, and like, it seems that we could say that it's correlated with their fatness, which, side note, is like, there's no blah, like, we can't even go there. But like, should that fat person have a right to be fat and sick? Like, should that, I'm like, yes, the answer like is yes. Yeah, that person has, yes. And so I don't answer those questions anymore, and I sort of like set a boundary of like, yeah, well, that's not what we're not actually not here to discuss. Like, should certain bodies be allowed to exist, which is like, I think for many people, what comes up around fatness, especially when people want to bring in issues around health. So then you're saying like, should I'm putting air quotes, should non-healthy people be allowed to exist? Should sick people be allowed to exist? Should disabled people be allowed to exist? We get into this place of like eugenics really quickly. We're like really in a eugenicist space. And this work is not about eugenics. This work is I don't know if it's the opposite of eugenics, but it's like, we're not doing that. And so, yeah, anyway, this is not maybe an answer to your question, but of why I'm open to working with people in different bodies, fat bodies, bodies that are not fat. Yeah, who I want to work with is people who like want us all to be free together, and who are curious about that, and who are curious about how fat might help us do that, and how our relationship to fat might help us do that.
Thank you, Jules, for that answer. I want to move us towards the end of our time together, which makes me deeply sad. But before we get to our very last question, I'm curious if people want to spend more time with you, spend more time with your work. What are some ongoing projects you'd like to share with folks or like people to know about?
Yeah. So I do one-to-one somatic and spiritual support. I just don't like the word coaching. And I trained as a therapist and I'm not a therapist. So I just say support because that's what it is. So I work with people in that way. I offer groups, I offer classes. I it's all on my Instagram, which is at fat as the sea. Yeah, that's like the best way to get in touch and follow my work and uh yeah, reach out. I love collaborating with different organizations. I love coming in to yeah, offer workshops and offer yeah, facilitated spaces for people, especially who are doing mission based work or yeah, like how do you take the mission or the values of your work and integrate those into how you're in relationship with yourself. That's also like a big piece of my work, and sort of including fat in that and sort of asking fat to ally that for us. So yeah, I love doing that work too. Yeah.
Uh, just want to shamelessly say, like, as someone who sat in on a workshop of Jules, it was really powerful. And that was just like one glimpse into the work that they do. And so I would so strongly recommend that anyone listening go and engage in whatever work Jules is putting out in the world. Like, you will be better for it after even the briefest moment with them.
Thank you. That's so sweet. Thank you.
Okay. So the hardest question in all of this is, and you can take a minute to think about this, it's no rush. If you could leave our listeners with one message, what would it be?
One message would be the way you are in relationship with yourself is the way you are in relationship with everything. That's it. It's like kind of a bummer, but
It's such a bummer.
such a bummer. And I really need to shout out Mia Mingus in this because I did a transformative justice training with Mia Mingus, and I'll never forget it. Like everyone, it's the first day, and she's like, "So I know you're all here to like learn about how you're gonna do transformative justice and healing work, and I like need to tell you all that like the place you start with is yourself. Like it's not like this like lofty thing of like, oh, I like learn these tools and go into like, and this is a healing justice framework that has such a lineage in like black and queer and disabled community. um but yeah, like the relationship you have with yourself, and that includes your fat tissue, is how you're in relationship with everything. And I want to stress here that like that doesn't mean it has to be like good. Like it doesn't have to be like I love this. I hope you get to tell the truth. Like I hope you actually get to be with like what's real and not what you've sort of had to like ingest. That isn't true. That's like not real. And I hope for all of us that we get to be with what is, and we get to really be with yeah, like what is, as opposed to sort of what we've been given that's not true. And so yeah, that the way we are, yeah, it just sort of is a fractal, very like Adrienne Marie Brown wisdom in that of that these are fractals. And so the yeah, our relationship with our fat tissue, our relationship with ourselves is a part of how we relate to everything and wholeness. And the other piece of that, like you're just as important as everything else. And that's also hard. Like that's just as important as like all the beautiful. I know people who are listening to this podcast are probably like fighting really hard for something that's so meaningful and so important, and that's gorgeous. And I hope you are also like really, maybe not fighting, but like really like loving and fighting for a way of being with yourself and in relationship with yourself that is full of the same love and care you have for the communities or other people that you give your energy to, that you are also just as like deserving and need to be a part of that. Need to, like, we need you to be a part of that too. That like the future we're all collectively building like doesn't exclude you and your relationship with yourself. It actually is like part of that. Which again, is maybe uncomfortable, but feels true. Yeah.
Well, I feel like I need to remind myself of that about every 5 minutes. So
Same. That's why I said it.
thank you. Yeah. No, that is the message. Jules, thank you so much for being here. You brought so much wisdom to our time together, and I'm grateful that everyone gets to hear all of it. And if you're listening, you should go and check out more of Jules's work at Fat as the Sea on Instagram. There are periods between all those words, I believe.
Yes, I believe so too.
But we'll have the link to Jules's Instagram in the podcast notes, as well as a few of the things that we have mentioned throughout the show. Thanks for being here with us, Jules.
Oh, thank you both so much. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for making menches. Is that too corny? But yeah, thank you.
No, I love it.
We're embracing it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Making Menches. As an explicitly anti-Zionist grassroots org, we don't receive any institutional funding or support. Please consider supporting our work by funding us. You can find the donation link on our website, makingmenches.com. You can follow us on Instagram at Making Menches. We host monthly Shabbats both in person and online, so make sure to sign up for our newsletter, which is on our website, to get updates.
Making Menches, the podcast, is produced by Elana Lipkin and Jesse Sander. Intro music is by Nate Sander.
Editing by Jules Pashall and Jesse Sander.